Heavy or Not, the OG Swim Guide, episode 84, unpacks some research from 3 years ago about elite coaching. But first, before we talk about how the International Swim Coaches Association is adding excellent layers of detail and enrichment, let's get our heads around the research that was conducted and have that become the first part of the foundation. Hat tip in the future to the textbooks from Dr. Ernie McLeishko.
Imagine the quintessential swim coach. What is that image that immediately pops into your brain?
Oh, it's so sensory, isn't it? I smell chlorine immediately. It's humid. And visually, I'm seeing someone on a pool deck, probably wearing shorts and a polo shirt, holding a stopwatch, and maybe shouting, "Go!" every 2 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have this pop culture archetype of the drill sergeant with the whistle, maybe a little bit of a tyrant, maybe a little old school. But then on the flip side, we have this modern idea of elite sports being run like a NASA control room. We imagine biologists, nutritionists, and supercomputers analyzing every single ripple in the water.
It's the Moneyball effect, right? We just assume everything at the Olympic level is purely data-driven.
Right. But today, we are going to, well, kind of smash both of those images. The actual reality of the pool deck. We've got a fascinating study here titled Swimming Coaches' Professional Development and Training Practices, an International Survey. It was published in Frontiers in Sports and Active Living in 2023.
And this is a really comprehensive look under the hood. I mean, the researchers didn't just ask a few local volunteers. They surveyed 123 competitive swim coaches from 41 different countries. And the caliber of these coaches is serious.
We aren't just talking about people teaching toddlers to blow bubbles.
No, definitely not. About 27% of these respondents were actively preparing athletes for world championships or, Olympic trials. These are the minds behind the gold medals. So when they speak about how they coach, we should probably listen.
So our mission today is to decode how these experts actually become experts. We're going to look at the unwritten rules of their education, a bizarre finding about how they view communication, and a really shocking paradox about technology that completely contradicts where the rest of the sports world is going.
It's a study that really humanizes the profession in a way I didn't expect.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. How does someone learn to coach swimming at an elite level? I mean, it's an incredibly technical sport. You're dealing with fluid dynamics, drag coefficients, physiology, biomechanics. You would assume the primary source of knowledge is a university classroom or ISCA textbook.
You would assume that. It's how we treat most technical professions. If you want to be an engineer, you go to engineering school. But this study found that for swim coaches, the real classroom is the pool deck itself.
The numbers here are just wild. When the researchers asked these coaches to list their primary sources of information, formal seminars and scientific papers they were essentially left in the dust. The number one source, by a huge margin, was discussions with other coaches.
88.9%. That is the specific stat. Nearly 9 out of 10 coaches said their biggest resource was just talking to their peers.
It feels almost medieval, doesn't it? Like a guild system where you learn to be a blacksmith by watching the master blacksmith?
That is actually the perfect analogy. It's the apprentice model. The study highlights this concept of tacit knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack that term. What is tacit knowledge in this context?
So explicit knowledge is something I can write down. Keep your elbow at a 90-degree angle. Kick from the hip, that's easy. Tacit knowledge is the feel. It's looking at a swimmer and knowing they're tired, not because a monitor told you, but because of the subtle way their shoulders slumped when they walked out of the locker room. You can't read that in a book. You absorb it by standing next to a mentor for 5 years.
Which would explain the other huge number in this section regarding mentorship.
80.9% of these coaches had a mentor. And they didn't just have one. Of those who had a mentor, 76.5% rated that relationship as extremely influential.
That is a massive endorsement. It suggests that despite all our modern connectivity, YouTube, online courses, webinars, the most valuable trade secrets are still passed human to human.
It creates a lineage of knowledge. You aren't just learning the drills, you're learning the intuition.
But here is where the human dynamic gets really complicated and honestly a little spicy. The study found a very interesting nuance about who is willing to share those secrets. There's a distinct divide based on experience levels.
This was one of the most psychologically revealing parts of the data. The researchers found that highly experienced coaches, we're talking the veterans, with 33 or more years on the job, were significantly more open to exchanging knowledge with rival clubs than the younger, less experienced coaches.
Which feels completely backwards, doesn't it? You'd think the old guard, the ones who've been winning for decades, would be the most secretive. Like Colonel Sanders guarding the spice recipe. You'd think they'd want to protect their legacy.
It does seem counterintuitive. But think about the psychology of a young coach. You're new. You're trying to prove yourself. You might have stumbled upon one or two drills or a specific taper strategy that seems to work. You are terrified that if the coach in the next lane learns it, they'll use it to beat you. You're insecure in your status, so you gatekeep.
So it's hoarding born out of insecurity.
Now look at the coach with 30 years of experience. They have decades of proof that their system works. They have confidence. They know that the secret sauce isn't the drill itself. It's the timing. It's the feedback. It's a relationship with the athlete. They can give you the recipe, but they know you can't cook the dish like they can.
That is such a powerful lesson for any industry. If you're hoarding knowledge, it might say more about your own insecurity than the actual value of the information.
Real experts know that execution matters more than the idea.
So these coaches are learning from each other, and the older ones are guiding the younger ones. But let's look at what they actually believe. The philosophy of the pool, if you will. The study asked them about their coaching philosophy, and I was relieved to see that 96.7% said their philosophy has changed over time.
Thank goodness for that. Nobody wants a doctor who hasn't learned anything new since 1995, and you definitely don't want a coach like that either. Adaptation is survival.
The study mentions this evolution happens through reflection, but also through episodic experiences. That term jumped out at me. It sounds a little dramatic.
It is academic speak for learning the hard way.
Right. The school of hard knocks.
An episodic experience is usually a specific, significant event. It's not just the daily grind. It's the time you overtrained a swimmer and they got injured right before nationals.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you mishandled a conversation with a parent and lost a talented athlete to another team. Those episodes sear into your brain. They force you to stop and say, okay, my manual was wrong. I need to rewrite this chapter.
So through these episodes, they refine what they think makes a good coach. And this is where the survey results really threw me for a loop. I had to read this table twice.
I have a feeling I know exactly which stat confused you.
It has to be the communication stat. They asked the coaches to rank the most important characteristics of a good coach. Number 1 was knowledge, understanding physical conditioning, psychology, if that makes sense. But communication skills was ranked basically at the bottom. It was around 10%.
It is shocking on the surface. I mean, open any leadership book, look at any corporate management guide, and page 1 is communication is key.
Right. How can you coach if you can't communicate? Are they just mime acting on the pool deck? Are they telepathic?
But we have to look at the specific context of high-performance swimming. It has a massive technical barrier to entry. Imagine you're a surgeon. You can have the best bedside manner in the world. You can be incredibly empathetic and articulate. But if you don't know where the artery is...
The patient is in trouble.
Exactly. In elite swimming, if you don't understand lactate thresholds or hydrodynamics or how to write a seasonal plan, your athlete simply will not make the Olympic team. No amount of charismatic talking will fix a flawed stroke. So the coaches prioritize the hard skills because they're the non-negotiable foundation.
That's a fair distinction. So it's not that they don't talk, it's that talking is secondary to technical competence. You have to know what to say before how you say it matters.
Correct.
But let's look at the other side of the equation, the athletes. What are these technically minded coaches trying to instill in the swimmers? We always hear about sports teaching life skills.
The study asked specifically about this. And the results really paint a picture of the sport's nature. The top 2 priorities were self-discipline at 62.3% and self-confidence at 58.4%.
And what was at the bottom?
Team mentality.
Which is wild to me. I watch the Olympics, I see the relays, I see the teammates cheering on the sidelines with the face paint. It looks like the ultimate team environment.
It looks like one on TV, but think about the reality of the daily grind. Swimming is essentially a sensory deprivation tank. You are face down in the water. Your ears are filled with water or plugs. You can't hear anyone. You can't speak. You are staring at a black line on the bottom of the pool for 2 to 4 hours a day.
Put that way, it sounds incredibly lonely.
It is a solitary pursuit. In soccer or basketball, if you're having a bad day during practice, a teammate can high-five you, pass you the ball, lift you up. In the pool, if you're hurting, you are hurting alone. You have to find that drive entirely within yourself.
So the environment dictates the values.
Coaches prioritize self-discipline because the sport demands it. If you can't push yourself when no one is watching and you can't breathe, you can't be a swimmer. Team mentality is nice, but it won't get you to the finish line.
That makes total sense. It creates a very specific type of resilient individual. Now, speaking of the environment, I want to pivot to the biggest shocker of this entire deep dive for me. This is the Moneyball section.
Or rather, the lack thereof.
I assumed elite swimming was run by algorithms. I thought every swimmer had sensors on their suit and cameras tracking their every move. But this study says not so much.
The data is stark. The study asked about the use of software packages and wearables for performance analysis. 52.5% of these coaches. Remember, these are elite coaches reported using no specific software. 0.
Over half are flying blind.
Well, they wouldn't call it flying blind. They rely on the naked eye.
The naked eye. It sounds almost mystical, like a superpower.
To them, it is. It's the belief that an experienced coach standing on the deck can see stroke flaws, timing issues, and fatigue patterns better than a computer model can. And honestly, for a long time, they were right. But yes, in 2023, to have half of the field relying solely on instinct and a stopwatch is a massive deviation from where other sports like cycling or baseball are.
But why? Is it just stubbornness? Are they Luddites?
It's a mix. Part of it is cost, sure, but a huge part is practicality. Setting up a full biomechanical analysis takes time. You have to put markers on the swimmer, set up underwater cameras, calibrate the software. If you have 30 kids in the pool and 90 minutes of water, you just can't disrupt the flow for that.
It kills the momentum of the practice.
But for the 40-ish% who are using tech, it's interesting to see what they use. The big names were Dartfish and Canovia.
I've heard of Dartfish. Explain what these actually do for the listener.
These aren't AI coaches telling you what to do. They're video analysis tools. They allow a coach to record a swim, slow it down frame by frame, measure angles on the screen. So again, it's really just a tool to enhance the naked eye. Helps the human see better. It doesn't replace the human judgment.
They're looking for what the study calls temporal parameters.
Right. Temporal just means time-based. Splits, stroke rate, how many strokes per minute, and stroke count. You can measure all of that with a simple stopwatch and a clipboard. You don't need a supercomputer.
So what about the physiology? If they aren't using force plates to measure kick power, what are they tracking inside the body?
The undisputed king is heart rate. 82.8% of coaches use it as their main performance index.
Why heart rate? I hear about lactate thresholds all the time in endurance sports. Isn't that more accurate?
Lactate testing is the gold standard for precision, yes. It tells you exactly how much acid is building up in the muscles. But think about the logistics. To test lactate, you have to stop the swimmer, have them climb out or hang on the wall, prick their earlobe or finger, take a blood sample, put it in a machine, and wait 15 seconds.
It's invasive.
It's invasive, it hurts, and it halts the practice. Heart rate, it's immediate. You touch the wall, check your pulse or your watch, and you go again. It gives you a good enough window into the internal load of the athlete without stopping the train. That's why only about 31% use lactate testing. Practicality wins every time.
Practicality wins. That seems to be the theme here. If it slows down the swim, it's out. But there is a more complex layer to the tech adoption story in this study. We need to address the finding regarding gender.
Yes, this is a crucial part of the data, and we need to be very precise about what it says. The researchers found a statistical difference. Male coaches reported being significantly more familiar with multiple analysis applications and models than female coaches.
Now, to be crystal clear for the listener, this is not the study saying men are better at tech.
Absolutely not. And the researchers go out of their way to frame this correctly. This is almost certainly a reflection of an access gap.
Connect the dots for us. How does access lead to this familiarity gap?
Well, think about where the high-tech toys live. They live in the top-tier, high-budget programs, national training centers, major universities with big endowments. Unfortunately, historically and currently, those head coaching roles are disproportionately held by men.
So if the men are getting the big job,
And the men are the ones getting the training budgets, the sports science departments, and the exposure to the complex software. If you are a female coach stuck in a lower-funded role or an assistant role due to systemic hiring biases, you simply aren't getting the reps with the technology.
that's a really important distinction. It's a pipeline issue.
And this study is significant because it's one of the first to specifically pinpoint how that representation gap trickles down into a skills gap. If we want to close the tech gap, We have to address the opportunities female coaches have to reach those high-performance environments.
Moving from the tech gap to what the study calls the education divide. We talked about mentorship, but what about actual university degrees? If I have a shiny bachelor's or master's in sports science, does that actually change how I coach on Tuesday morning?
The data says yes. The education divide creates two specific behavioral changes. First, coaches with degrees are much more likely to read academic journals.
Which brings us back to that tacit versus explicit knowledge. They can access the raw science directly.
Right, they have the vocabulary. Reading a paper on mitochondrial density or biomechanical drag can be intimidating if you don't have the background. Degree holders can translate that academic speak into plain English for their swimmers. They become the bridge between the lab and the pool.
And the second change.
This one is huge. Coaches with degrees are significantly more likely to implement the LTAD model.
We love a good acronym on this show. Break down LTAD for us.
Long-term athletic development. It's a framework that prioritizes the athlete's biological age and developmental stage over winning right now.
Give me a concrete example. How does this look in practice?
Okay, imagine you have a 12-year-old boy who hit puberty early. He's big, he's strong, he has a mustache. The win now approach says, train him like a man, load on the volume, high intensity, and he'll crush everyone at the state meet.
But the LTAD approach.
The LTAD approach says, wait, his joints aren't ready, his aerobic base isn't fully formed. If we push him now, he might win gold at 12, but he'll be burned out or injured by 16. LTAD is about holding back, focusing on technique, and peaking when it matters in their 20s.
It's the marshmallow test for coaches, delaying gratification.
Exactly. And that is incredibly hard to do. Think about the pressure from parents. Why isn't my kid swimming faster today?
We pay you to win.
Right. The studies suggest that having that formal education gives coaches the confidence to stick to the plan. When a parent is screaming, the coach with the degree can point to the physiology and say, trust the process. We are building an Olympian, not a middle school champion.
It gives them the scientific backbone to resist the pressure.
And interestingly, 80.5% of all coaches claim to use LTAD principles. The researchers think that number might be a little optimistic. Everyone wants to say they do it because it's the correct answer. But the degree holders are the ones most likely to actually practice what they preach when the pressure is on.
So let's zoom out and look at this portrait we've painted. I expected a story about AI, big data, and futuristic training. But the modern elite swim coach is surprisingly old school.
It's a very human profession. It's a person who relies on their peers and mentors to learn the craft. They value self-discipline above almost everything else because they understand the lonely nature of the water.
And despite living in a world of smart everything, they trust their gut, their naked eye, more than the algorithm.
That's the big takeaway for me. We often think that optimizing performance means removing the human element and replacing it with cold, hard data. But this study shows that in one of the most physically demanding sports on Earth, the coaches at the highest level still view it as an art form.
It makes you wonder about the so what for the listener who isn't a swim coach. What do we take away from this?
I think the lesson is about the definition of expertise. If you want to be great at something, don't just read the manual. Find the person who wrote the manual and buy them a coffee. That mentorship, that tacit knowledge is still the currency of success.
And don't be afraid to share what you know. If the Olympic coaches aren't worried about rivals stealing their secrets, you probably shouldn't be either.
Confidence leads to sharing. Insecurity leads to hoarding. Be the veteran, not the rookie.
I want to leave everyone with a final thought to chew on. We talked about the naked eye winning out over technology. But computer vision is getting scary good. AI is starting to see things the human eye literally cannot. Tiny inefficiencies in the kick that happen in a millisecond.
Things you can't see from the pool deck through the splash and glare, no matter how experienced you are.
Is the art of coaching on borrowed time? Will there come a tipping point where the coaches who refuse to embrace the software are simply left in the wake of those who do?
Is the stopwatch finally running out of time? It's a fascinating thought.
Something to think about next time you're doing laps.
What actually separates a good coach from a truly legendary one? You know, for decades, we've had this image of the perfect coach, right? That wise figure on the pool deck, guided almost entirely by gut feelings and just years and years of experience. But is that still the whole picture, or has the game completely changed? This gives us an incredible, globe-spanning snapshot of what's happening at the very highest levels of the sport. Where do these elite minds get their information? Now, if you're picturing them all just buried in textbooks and academic journals, well, you might be in for a surprise. As it turns out, the most powerful learning tool for these coaches isn't a formal course or a textbook. Nope, it's other coaches. It's those informal, peer-to-peer conversations where the real magic is happening. And look at this slide, because the contrast here is just wild. While yeah, about half of the coaches use formal stuff like federation programs or scientific papers, a massive 89%, almost everyone, relies on just talking with their peers. And right behind that, 81% are using the internet and blogs. This tells you they're actively directing their own learning, right there on the pool deck, not just waiting for some official course to come along. And you know, this reliance on other people, it goes so much deeper than just swapping a few notes. For so many of these coaches, it's actually a career-defining relationship. 81%. That is a huge number, right? More than 4 out of 5 of these elite coaches said they had a mentor who guided them along the way. But that's not even the whole story. Because of that group that had a mentor, a staggering 77% described their impact as extremely influential. We're not talking about just some casual advice here and there. This is a foundational, transformative relationship that really shapes who they become as leaders. It was never just about winning races. When they were asked what life skills they most want to instill in their athletes, the top 2 answers had nothing to do with technique. It was self-discipline and self-confidence. They're building people, not just swimmers. Okay, so we know how they learn and what they value in their swimmers. But what about in themselves? What do they believe makes a coach truly effective? First off, it's absolutely crucial to get this. Their philosophies are not set in stone. Pretty much all of them, we're talking 97%, said their whole approach has evolved over time. Coaching isn't some static rulebook. It's a living, breathing practice that grows and adapts with every new experience. So when they look at the mirror, what do they see as the most important skill in their own toolkit? Well, the #1 ranked skill was technical coaching knowledge, the hard stuff like physical conditioning and sports psychology. But here's what's really surprising. Ranked lower was effective communication skills. Now, it's still important, for sure, but it didn't top the list. And that shows a real emphasis on the hard science and strategy of the sport. Which naturally brings us to a really fascinating area, technology. I mean, with all the data available today, you'd think every coach would basically be a data scientist, right? Well, the reality is a little more complicated. So, on the surface, it looks like a slight majority are on board. About 56% of coaches say they use some kind of software or analytical method to predict performance. Okay, but let's peel back another layer here. Because here's the paradox. Over half of the coaches surveyed said they don't use any of the major off-the-shelf software packages. The big names like Dartfish or Canovia. So what does that mean? It suggests that while many are using some kind of method, there's a real gap in adopting that standardized, professional-grade tech. So what are they actually tracking? Well, the data shows a clear preference for simple, practical metrics. A huge 83% track heart rate. It's accessible, it's easy to implement, but as you get to more complex data points, you see this significant drop-off. And what this really tells us is that for these elite coaches, practicality often wins out over complexity, every time. Okay, now we get to the final, and maybe the single most important finding of this entire study. There is one factor that seems to influence a coach's entire approach more than anything else. And it's this, their formal education level. The study concluded that whether or not a coach has a university-level education in sports science is one of the biggest predictors of their training practices and, you guessed it, how they use technology. And this table right here, it just lays the divide out in stark detail. Just look at the difference. 73% of university-educated coaches read scientific papers compared to just 34% of those without that background. They're also way more likely to use long-term athlete development models, or LTAD, and are significantly more familiar with performance analysis software. It's a true night and day difference in how they approach the science of the sport. So it leaves us with this powerful final thought. We know that talking to your peers and having a mentor are absolutely vital. But as the sport gets more and more scientific, is a formal degree becoming the new non-negotiable ticket to the top? Is that the real gold medal for the modern coach? What do you think?
I do want to know what you think. This is Coach Mark. I'm working with ISCA and the wafsu.org, and we're rolling out seminars and lessons and building up our learning laboratory. Subscribe, interact, drop in some comments, become a member of ISCA. ISCA membership is $75, and you'll get access to the Global Library for ISCA members. It's a rich treasure chest of excellent resources.